And now, welcome to this session.
This session provides practical insights into building and managing cost-effective serverless generative AI applications, focusing on strategies like RAG and budget optimization techniques for organizations of varying capacities and resources. Our next speaker is an AWS machine learning hero with a track record of leading technology teams and winning global competitions. He's also the author of 3 books on machine learning and cloud technologies. Please give a round of applause for the Chief Technology Officer of NewWorks Interactive Labs, Mr. Joshua Arvin Lapp.
So good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining this session. So I'll just share my screen quickly. And then we have a very action-packed morning. Sige, so let's get started. So today, we will be talking about the best practices and strategies when building serverless generative AI-powered applications. So for the past couple of years, we've been seeing a lot of companies really trying to get into generative AI. And I will also share my own experiences building it for the company I'm working on. So there. So again, action-packed yung morning kasi we have 58 to 60 slides. So relatively fast-paced yung ating pacing for this morning. So to quickly introduce myself, I am Joshua Arvin Lat, and I am the Chief Technology Officer of NewWorks Interactive Labs. I am an AWS machine learning hero, and I'm the author of 3 books. So the first book, I think that was released 3 years ago or 4 years ago, Machine Learning with Amazon SageMaker Cookbook. So 1 year after that, na-release yung second book. It's called Machine Learning Engineering on AWS. And then after that, there's a third book, Building and Automating Penetration Testing Labs in the Cloud. So that's about security on AWS, Azure, and GCP. So later, meron tayong teaser. But for now, I'll be sharing those 3 books. And 1 year ago, I also won the Orange Boomerang Award, which is given to the Digital Leaders of the Year nung last year. So enough about myself. It's now time to talk about the topic. So my question for everyone is, have you ever wondered how long it will take to build that generative AI-powered application? So before talking about the best practices, it's about checking lang the reality. How long does it really take to build that generative AI-powered application? So if we are to dissect this question, it's better if we focus first on generative AI. No generative AI talk is complete without even introducing what it is or what we can do with it. But of course, we just should take a few minutes. So for example, let's say that I type in the prompt, audience members watching a conference talk. Then your generative AI solution or tool could generate something like this. So you type in a prompt and then you get an image. So for the past year or so, we've been talking about generative AI that maybe there's no need for an explanation, but again, an example should do the trick for now. Another good example is, let's say that you type in the following prompt, then you tell the solution or the AI tool, you are a very intelligent bot with exceptional critical thinking. I have a conference talk that lasts for about an hour. I shouldn't spend more than 2 to 3 minutes per slide. So I asked the AI, how many slides do I need? So one possible answer would be this. So again, I won't read this. In short, the AI recommended that I should have 22.5 slides only. And it mentions here that, of course, this is just an estimate and it depends on the context and complexity of the talk. So again, we are in the 8th slide and we have 50 plus slides left. But again, that's our quick introduction to generative AI. So going back to the question, have you ever wondered how long it will take to build that generative AI powered application? So here's my take on this. It should not take more than 6 months? So again, I'll repeat the answer. It should not take more than 6 months. So the prototype could take maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, maybe 3 days for those of you already very familiar with the tools and the solutions. But again, it should not take more than 6 months. So why could it take 6 months or even longer? Why could it take more than 2 to 3 months or 4 months? Because after you build your first prototype and after you release it to the end users, you'll realize that what you built is only a portion of what's really needed in production. There's a lot of things that you have to worry about when doing things in production. So last year in NewWorks, we released the first version of our generative AI tool. We called it NewWorks AI. And again, we were trying to build our own ChatGPT, but with the focus of securing and ensuring the security of the data. We do not want our data and the files to be uploaded somewhere, and for the data, the confidential data, to be processed by a third party solution. So what we did is we again built our own generative AI system, and it's more or less a very simplified ChatGPT clone. So here's how it worked. So it started with having a data science environment where we basically selected an open source large language model, and then we use SageMaker, a managed machine learning service of AWS, and then we deployed it in an inference endpoint. So for those of you who are using GCP or Azure, then of course there's counterparts to this one. But when you're dealing with a self-hosted large language model setup, then you would have to worry about a lot of things. You would have to worry about the setup. If you need to know about containerization, if you need to have to manage the infrastructure in some sort, then this is most likely the way to go. Then we deployed the large language model in an inference endpoint. And then if you're asking what an inference endpoint is, it's basically something like a web server where you pass in an input, which is probably a prompt, and then the output, which could be text or image or something generated by your generative AI solution. So in the past, before this generative AI force, what's passed in the inference endpoint, of course, depends on the machine learning model deployed. However, the difference right now is, given that we are deploying a large language model, the inference endpoint, which is in this case a server, has to be very large. When they say very large, it has to have very high specs server. It's a high spec server, meaning that it's a bit more expensive than usual. So the challenge here is that there are about 100 plus employees in the company, and then everyone's expected to use it. But the question is, are they going to use it right away? So the answer to that question is they will not use it right away, and they will not use it at the same time. And it's hard to predict when they would use it. Would they be using it in the weekends, etc.? So do you turn it off in the weekend? Do you try to reduce the cost by turning it off every Saturday and Sunday, and then just turning it on every Monday? So the iteration after the first release last year was 1 to 2 weeks later, when I computed the cost, which is a bit too late. I realized that there are techniques such as quantization, where you're able to reduce the overall size of the model. And of course, there would be savings from an infrastructure end, of course, with caveats. And I realized that maybe there's a better way to do things. And that's the reason why we migrated to the serverless version of this. So before migrating to the serverless version of this, of course, after deploying the large language model in an inference endpoint, the other components of the architecture needs to be implemented as well. Deploying the model in its own inference server or its own server is just one part of the problem, or one part of the architecture. And then the other components need to be implemented. So the other parts in this diagram, they are serverless. And then the one on the right side, the one here, if you can see, not sure if you can see my mouse, but the large language model deployed in a SageMaker inference endpoint, that's not serverless. So again, as mentioned earlier, this came with its own set of challenges, which is primarily the cost and performance. It doesn't mean that you're spending a lot of money on a server. It doesn't mean that it will perform well. And at the same time, um, it took about 30 to 40 seconds for the server to respond with an answer. So at that point in time, last year, it was pretty normal. But right now, if you ask an AI chatbot, you expect it to respond within probably 5 to 10 seconds or even faster. So before, given that it's primarily the first attempt, then 40 to 45 seconds would do the trick, and then we can probably optimize later. But right now, sharing this already, the latest version is answering within 1 to 2 seconds. And if no one is using it, nobody's paying for it. That's why it's really good to go serverless at the start. Then you have to analyze which components can be replaced later on. And that's definitely a best practice that you should know. So another best practice that you should know is, before diving deeper into any generative AI app development work, it's important to at least try estimating how much the entire application will cost before building the actual application. A lot of us are really excited about building these solutions. Oh, this one, oh, there's free tier, there's free credits, or it's only going to take me 1,000 to 2,000 pesos to prepare the first POC. Then I think that you should check how costing works first. Because even if you try estimating it now, you will realize that there are other unforeseen costs later on. So the moment that you have to work with advanced queries, the moment that you have to work with longer context lengths, the moment that you have to work with multiple models, then that's where it gets tricky. And at the same time, the server cost and the solutions to manage hallucinations. So for example, if you're trying to build a retrieval augmented generation powered system, then the cost for that system would be completely different compared to a system which doesn't have RAG in place. So again, if there's something that you learned from this talk, it would be this one. Try estimating first how much the entire application will cost before building the actual application. So there are multiple components to that. The number one component would be the cost of using the model. Number two would be the infrastructure cost, the cost of using the other cloud resources. And number three, the cost of building it. So the humans, the man hours needed to build the application. Moving on. So after a week or so of building this generative AI solution, here's what we have. So we have a static website hosting S3 bucket. So for those who probably know this already, S3 is a storage service where you can basically upload your files, and then there's a feature where if you upload your HTML files there, then you're able to host a static website. So I basically uploaded the front end files there. And then there's the API gateway, which serves as like a pass-through or a way to manage the request to the backend resources. So the backend resources in this example is, there's an AWS Lambda function, which is a serverless function, which would invoke other resources like the inference endpoint shown in this diagram. And of course, there's the database, because there needs to be memory. Memory needs to be stored somewhere. That's not in the inference endpoint. So again, there are different ways to build this application, but for the sake of simplicity, we have this architecture. So going back to the question, have you ever wondered how long it will take to build that serverless generative AI powered application? So it's now time we dive a bit deeper into the word serverless. So again, we'll be diving into the word serverless, which is a very tricky word if you think about it. The cloud platforms have very different definitions, have varying definitions or ways to describe serverless. Sometimes they would describe a certain service as serverless, while the other tech experts and professionals would call it otherwise. Sometimes the pricing does not match how the serverless pricing works, and that's normal. Because there's, as we'll see later, there are various serverless services and there's a spectrum to it. So number one, so what are we sure of? So number one, serverless is not equivalent to functions as a service. So a lot of us would say, oh, serverless, that's AWS Lambda, no, or some other counterpart of in GCP and Azure, no? Yung mga serverless functions. So serverless functions, they would fall under functions as a service. But there's a bigger set, no, superset, serverless, which includes functions as a service. So as you can see here, they're not equivalent. Functions as a service is a subset of serverless. So that's clear. Yeah. So number 2 is when you're working with functions as a service like Lambda, then most of the time you would have to worry about the application code only. Okay, in some cases when you need a bit more customization, then you may have control over the execution environment where that function code is working. So for example, if your function code accepts, let's say, a string input and then the output would be, let's say, an image, then in most cases you should be fine just tweaking the application code, especially if the execution environment provides enough enough of the prerequisites needed to run the application code. So some services, especially the mature ones, would allow you to not just update the application code, but also the execution environment. Meaning there's something called container-backed Lambda functions or serverless functions, where you can upload your Docker containers, and that would be used as the environment for your serverless functions. So for generative AI-powered applications or for AI-powered applications, this could be very powerful. So before, some of the machine learning models could fit in their serverless functions. However, right now, especially large language models, it's hard to the point that it's nearly impossible to fit all of that in a serverless function given the resource constraints and limitations. But for now, we will use the serverless functions as a way to glue the different services and solutions all together. So these serverless functions are used in various ways. So one of the possible architectures here, so again, this diagram does not include generative AI yet, and we'll incorporate that later. So these serverless functions would scale automatically. Okay, so that's the vague statement for it. So it would scale automatically, and the traffic would pass through the API gateway, and then a serverless function would be invoked. In some cases, your serverless function would talk to other resources, such as a serverless database, or potentially a database which is not serverless. So again, it's not required for your serverless resource to talk to a serverless resource. It's possible for your serverless resources to talk to other non-serverless resources. In addition to this, your serverless resource could be invoked in other ways. So, for example, there's an event producer, and there are events. And these events can be in the form of, they are events. So events, and associated with these events would be data. So for example, there's somebody who uploaded a file in your storage bucket. Then that file would trigger an event. That file upload would trigger an event, and a Lambda function resource or a serverless function resource would be invoked. And then the next steps would be performed. So for example, if you uploaded a file and then it's a file processing function, then that file processing function would be activated. Then of course, if you want, let's say, compress or update the image, then you can upload it again in a new storage bucket or folder. So again, there are various ways to build serverless applications. And one of the things that we're sure of when we're dealing with serverless applications is that these serverless resources can be invoked in various ways. And it's like Lego pieces where you connect the dots and build various combinations of the same architecture. In addition to this, when managing complexity, at the start, you will start with 1 or 2 serverless functions. But once you start working with a lot of resources, you will need other services, such as serverless workflow services, which would make use of various building blocks like functions and other non-serverless resources to perform a certain task. So before, probably decades ago, you would be working on a single application, right? So in a single application, all the code is there. When working with serverless architectures, the logic would be distributed across various resources. And the advantage to this approach is that when you're working with multiple members in the team, then one possibility would be certain members to be assigned to specific resources. So for example, one developer or engineer would simply own one serverless function, and then the other engineer would work and own the other resource. So that's one take when dealing with resource management and project management when working on serverless projects. Okay, so, and finally, for serverless, again, serverless is a concept. There are different ways to define it, and there's a spectrum of serverless services: high, medium, low. One person could call a service serverless. The cloud service would probably call it not serverless. Sometimes it's the other way around. So here, what's important is that we have a good understanding of what we call the serverless architecture. And the properties and the strategies discussed earlier, that would apply to the serverless architectures, like the serverless architectures being event driven, and for different resources to have the cost models, where if you use the project more, or if you use the application more, then the cost would scale automatically. So there's a concept called scale to zero. So serverless functions, for example, as far as I can remember, is if you use the function or the resource, let's say once, let's say it's 1 centavo, for example, then if you use it 100 times, it's going to be 1 peso. So again, I'm just making up the numbers because it's much cheaper in reality. So let's say that nobody's using it, then it would scale to zero, meaning that more or less you shouldn't be paying for anything. So comparing that to the example earlier, where we have an inference server in SageMaker running 24/7, even if there's no one using it at that point in time, then you would be still paying for it because the resource is on. So when you're using services which are not serverless, in most cases, you would be paying for the time that the server is on, because it's waiting for a request or a process to happen. Then when you're working with a serverless resource, for those services which fall under the high tier in the spectrum, then more or less it should scale to zero. So there are serverless services which do not scale to zero, and other tech professionals are arguing that, or is that service really serverless? So that's why the debate is there. And the answer to that is there's a spectrum of serverless services. Is that clear, guys? A thumbs up if that's clear. So that's a very important concept of serverless. Perfect. All right. So going back to our generative AI application, let's now convert it into a serverless generative AI powered application. So the only thing that changed here would be the right side. So earlier, it was a machine learning model deployed in an inference server. Now, instead of having a server which is running 24/7, I can't remember if it's like 12x large, no? And then after quantization, it became 2x large. Which is still expensive after computation. If the usage level is not enough to reach maybe 80 to 90% of that server resource, then it makes sense to convert it into the serverless implementation. So again, you do not have to repeat the entire application. If you coded it correctly, then you would be able to still reuse the other components of the application. So the only thing that we need to change more or less would be the right side. And the advantage when you're working with serverless resources is that the management of these resources falls under the responsibility of the cloud provider. So here, earlier, when I tried it myself, it was 30 seconds. No, the response time was 30 seconds. Because for one thing, I cannot afford to have a really large server and then the usage level would just be 5 to 10%. Of course, 30 seconds could easily be improved to 15 seconds if I had a much more powerful server. But in this case, a serverless approach would make more sense, especially if the usage level is still low when it's being rolled out to various teams in the company. So again, given that the resource and the service is managed by the cloud provider, then they're the ones responsible on making it secure, making it perform really fast, and making it scale automatically. Meaning you don't have to worry about all the server work because, again, it's serverless. So what's the service which was used to replace the SageMaker inference endpoint? So here, there's a service called Bedrock. So again, I'm not from AWS. No, I'm an AWS machine learning hero, a community representative. Okay, so I'm not selling Bedrock. So you could use whatever serverless service available for you. So again, make sure that you're able to compute the cost ahead of time. And if you are using a different cloud provider, then just look for the corresponding service there. In most cases, there would be a counterpart service, and you just need to know the limitations and you have to know the maturity level of the services. Sometimes when a service is, let's say, released, first 3 months, there are still a lot of features in the pipeline which are not yet available compared to the more mature services released 3 to 4 years ago. So again, the advantage when using Bedrock instead of SageMaker is that with just a few lines of code, you should be able to build an application, and even without understanding the machine learning engineering process, then you would be able to build an application in probably 48 to 72 hours because you don't have to worry about any sort of machine learning engineering responsibilities. A few weeks later, after a lot of users were testing the application, a lot of users told me, are the answers updated? So one of the challenges when working with generative AI solutions is that if there's no internet integration, I'll just call it internet integration. If there's no search integration, internet search integration, then the answers of your large language model would of course be limited to the training data used to prepare the model. Okay, so let me repeat that. So for example, if let's say the training data used to prepare that model is, let's say, 6 months ago, right? And then there are no other data sources. It's as simple as one model, and then you just use an open source version. Then in terms of relevance, then there are of course challenges with that. So the last couple of months, there's been a lot of buzz about retrieval augmented generation. I think this is even from last year. And retrieval augmented generation helps your solution provide better answers, while it's not really able to fully mitigate hallucinations. It's able to provide better answers and limit the hallucination rate. So a lot of professionals would say, no, retrieval augmented generation completely removes hallucination. Well, from experience, it's not. No. But it helps reduce hallucination. So a system without RAG would, in a general sense, perform less, or it won't provide relevant answers compared to retrieval augmented generation powered systems. Okay. So right now, if you're trying to utilize a custom data source and you want to use that as a reference by your generative AI model when providing answers to the users, then of course, you may need something like this. So again, RAG is one of the solutions available when trying to provide relevant answers to users. Okay, so you can think of this as like having sort of like a database where you have your answers there, and then in your database, there's a search capability. So let's say you ask how old is this person, if the answer is not available in the internet, which was used to prepare the data for the generative AI model, then without RAG, your generative AI model wouldn't be able to answer that question. However, with retrieval augmented generation, if the answer to your question is inside that search database, then your you can augment your solution with better answers available in the database. Okay, so right now, if you look at the architecture now, there are now two components on the right side. So earlier, it was just the green one. And right now, there's a purple one. Now, you can just think of this like boxes. So green box and then purple box. So the green box here would map to the large language model. And then the purple one here would be the component which would help make the system RAG powered. And you would be surprised. And you would be asking me, hey, isn't that the SageMaker? Isn't that the SageMaker logo? Then the answer is yes. Because there's a way to use SageMaker and to have models deployed in a serverless manner. And I will share the solution in the next 30 minutes. And you would be excited because this is not documented. And you would have to be very creative in building this custom solution. All right. So again, repeating the question, is this component really serverless? Earlier you mentioned, so Sir Arbs, you mentioned earlier that your first solution was not serverless. You mentioned that you deployed a machine learning model in SageMaker, and you mentioned that the server where the model is hosted, it's running 24/7. Are you really sure, sir, that it's serverless? So the solution earlier was not serverless because it used a server which is running 24/7. In SageMaker, there are various deployment options. So the first one would be a real-time inference endpoint. And then there's the asynchronous endpoint. And then there's the serverless inference endpoint. And then there's batch transform. So if you have a good idea on what deployment options are available, then you would be able to choose the right deployment strategy for your application. So if the machine learning model is small enough, then you would be able to deploy it in a serverless inference endpoint. So during the time that I was trying to squeeze in a large language model in a serverless inference endpoint in SageMaker, back then it was not yet possible. Not sure if it's possible now, but probably not. So right now, what's working in SageMaker would be the smaller models because there are constraints when working with serverless resources. So you can think of this like a Lambda function or a serverless function where if you pass in an input, then the resource would only be enabled or activated when it's triggered or invoked. So a serverless inference endpoint would simply act like, yeah, a generative AI service. It's very similar to that. No, it's a generative AI service which would only run if it's invoked. So let's say that if it costs 1 peso to invoke that, then if you only invoked it 10 times in a month, then it's only going to cost you 10 pesos. So that's how a serverless inference endpoint works. So now you're using two services, Bedrock and SageMaker. So Bedrock, the one at the top, and then SageMaker at the bottom. So what we did is we basically used scikit-learn. Oh, old school, no? We use scikit-learn and custom scripts and utilized two machine learning models and trained it for that serverless solution to serve like a vector database. So in cloud platforms, sometimes they provide vector database solutions. However, the vector databases available when we last check provided fixed cost in terms of like the costing part. No? So let's say that you have this generative AI service, which you pay for the number of times you use it. Again, serverless. And then this serverless service or resource, the vector database, it has the fixed cost component to it, meaning that you would have to pay for that service even though that no one is using it. So in order to optimize the cost, then it makes sense to find a way for this resource to be serverless completely and it scales to zero. So again, let me repeat that because that's very important. A lot of you guys would probably want to build your own generative AI powered applications, and having a large language model would not be enough when you're working with custom data. Once you have to work with custom data, there needs to be some sort of solution like retrieval augmented generation, and RAG would require a vector database or a solution which would augment the generative AI brain. So there's the brain, and then there's the search engine. So the search engine is kind of expensive because the resource managing the search engine capabilities and features, you're paying for the R that it's running, even if no one is using it. So the solution here would be to use SageMaker and use the customization capabilities to replace that component with a serverless solution which scales to zero. So we use two models here. And then we deployed it in a serverless inference config. So you specify the maximum memory, maximum concurrency, and then there, your models are deployed, and you will not be paying for anything unless that resource is used. Yeah. So using these services are fairly straightforward as long as you have templates to start with. So how do retrieval augmented generation works? So basically, the search engine component, when you pass in text, then it tries to search for the closest match records. So for example, you type in your name. So who is, then insert name. Then the records in the database would be searched, and then the search engine's responsibility is to provide the top X matches, and then you would use that and pass that in the context when querying the large language model. So let me repeat that. So you pass in the text, so who is this person, then the query, the words there, would be matched in the search engine. So the search engine would return the closest match results, and then that would be passed. So the results would be passed to the large language model so that there's more relevance in the answers. So you would now use the reasoning skills of the large language model, and it would utilize the output of the search engine. And that search engine, in this case, was replaced by a custom resource which makes use of a serverless inference endpoint. There. So if you have really good coding skills, and if you have good familiarity with the machine learning concepts before this generative AI force, then you would be able to use those solutions to create your own serverless search engine. So as far as I can remember, I did not include it here, but that's included in my fourth book, the second edition of Machine Learning Engineering on AWS. Medyo maka-plug na. So the second edition of my book, it was released 2 years ago. And then because of all this generative AI force, I was forced to rewrite the entire book and to include generative AI solutions. It's super different. It's like ML 1.0 and then ML 2.0. There's a lot of things which change. So for example, model monitoring, model drift. You could easily talk about that in like in the models deployed 2 to 3 years ago. But when working with large language models, model monitoring, for example, is very different. So when you're working with generative AI powered applications right now, in most cases, you would be working with various types of models. Then you would need to have a different set of strategies for large language models and for the smaller models. So there's of course small language models. So again, different treatment. And there are of course models like XGBoost, etc., or algorithms which would require separate treatment. So in this case, the models deployed in that serverless inference endpoint, they are not generative AI models. No, they are not large language models. They're basically the models discussed in the previous decade. And you would be surprised that it works. So now, one best practice that you guys should know is when working with generative AI powered solutions, especially the serverless version of it, is you need to measure how long it takes for each component or function to complete the assigned task. So I will repeat that again. It's important for us to measure how long it takes for each component or function to complete the assigned task. Going back to our slide here, you can see here that now it takes 3 to 10 seconds. So earlier, it was around 2 to 5 seconds without the search engine. So again, the retrieval augmented generation powered systems make use of the large language model and the search engine. Simply put, before the search engine was there, it was probably 2 to 5 seconds. And then when we put the search engine there, it became 3 to 10 seconds. So it's important for you to know where the bottleneck is and what causes the slowdown. Because in some cases, while you may say, oh, this is just 3 to 10 seconds, the moment that there are a lot of users using the application, every second counts. If you're able to reduce this to 1 to 2 seconds, then that's great. If it takes your system 20 to 30 seconds to respond, then your system will have problems scaling, even if it's serverless. A lot of you guys would say, oh, it's serverless, it's going to scale infinitely. It's not the case. Because there are guardrails there. And in some cases, you would have to specify the maximum number of resources needed to run those serverless resources. So that's very important. So here, for example, there's a Lambda function or a serverless function running, and it would be invoked when the API gateway receives a request. What if the serverless function hasn't been running for more than a day? So there's also something called cold start. So you would also have to worry about those things, because if it takes your Lambda function on the first invocation 20 seconds to respond, then in addition to 3 to 10 seconds here, it would become 30 seconds. So what does that mean? It means that, let's say that your application has not been running for or it's not activated or invoked for 1 day. So what will happen there is, on the first request, then your application would respond after 20 to 30 seconds, because the serverless function is still asleep and you would have to wake it up. And then, of course, the first request would be very slow, and then the second request would be very fast. That's basically how it works. So from experience, when you've been using the serverless function, let's say once every 15 minutes, then it will not go back to the cold state. Again, it depends. It really depends on the cloud platform. But let's say that you've not been using it for 2 hours, then it might take your serverless function, let's say 30 seconds to respond. So let's say that you have a Slack integration. So if you have a Slack integration, and I believe that when you integrate with Slack, if it's synchronous, you have to respond within 5 seconds. I can't remember. No. So there are various ways to integrate with Slack. And when you integrate with Slack and there's 3-second limit or something, then your Lambda function should respond within 3 seconds. So you need to find ways to work around this. And the solution there would not just to have one Lambda function, but 2. So what will happen there is the first Lambda function would respond right away to the Slack service. And then the second Lambda function would be invoked by the first Lambda function. And then the response would now be asynchronous moving forward. At least the first AWS Lambda function would get completed, or it would finish right away, even if it takes 30 seconds for the second Lambda function to complete. And of course, the first Lambda function is still prone to that cold start issue. And again, with this adjusted architecture, this architecture is much simpler to solve because the logic in the first Lambda function is much simpler compared to the logic in the second Lambda function. So if it's a bit confusing, in summary, instead of one function, there are two functions, with one function being used to invoke the second function, which includes most of the business logic. There. So again, the lesson here would be measure how long it takes for each component or function to complete the assigned task. So if it takes one component 30 seconds to process something, then at least you have a good idea on what to optimize and what to scale. So there. So how do we manage complexity? So when working with serverless generative AI solutions, managing complexity doesn't come into mind when you are just trying your proof of concept solution. So first 2 weeks, probably one function, and then you realize, oh, I need two functions, then that's probably it. In reality, one of the challenges when working with serverless solutions would be once the number of resources reach a certain number, let's say 5 to 10 or 20, invoking one function from one function is not really sustainable. You may need at some point an orchestration service. So something like step functions. So step functions, for example, allows you to write the workflow code, and you're able to easily manage the state, and it makes the solution more observable, right? So again, if you're able to look into these types of services when you're working with multiple resources, then it could simplify the work. And then when you're working with teams, and then let's say you have managers, then your managers won't have to dive into the serverless function code. In some cases, the interface should be more than enough for them to identify where the error happened. So for example, there are 5 resources there. In your serverless workflow service, in the 5 circles there, there's an error in the third one. So you'll see that green, green, red, white, white. So white, because the functions haven't run yet. Green, because the functions have run already. And then red, there's an error when processing the data passed by the previous function. So you don't need, again, you don't need all members of the team to process those executions. You just need maybe one member to quickly look at the dashboard and then, engineer one, kindly process the error in the serverless function because you're the one owning that function. So that's what you have to do when you're working with multiple resources. So again, that's just one solution, and there are various ways to solve this complexity challenge. There are various architectures possible, and you have to plan and decide, and you would have to allocate time when you're trying to increase the complexity of your serverless generative AI powered applications. So why is this important? So at the start, you would probably be using a single model. Then later on, you would be adding components needed for retrieval augmented generation. Later on, you would realize that your request would be processed by 2 models instead. To optimize cost, sometimes you would have a model for these types of tasks, and you would have the cheaper models for various tasks. So there. So when you're using a serverless implementation, then complexity could immediately increase. So having this discussed in, let's say, 3 to 5 minutes, it's going to be very important for you because you might be underestimating the number of serverless functions needed to manage all of those models. So how about monitoring? So when dealing with multiple resources, it's important that monitoring is already planned ahead of time, especially the setup. So when you're dealing with multiple resources, it's important that you have a dashboard. So again, before, you may probably survive without a dashboard. But once you have to work with 20 resources, when there's an error, you need to have a dashboard or some sort of search engine which would help you easily find a needle in the haystack. So if there's a bug in your application, then let's say somebody complained. So how would you know what the problem is? How would you know how to fix that issue? So in addition to this, each request from the user needs to be mapped with an event ID. So an event ID is important because if there's an issue, you could simply troubleshoot. And then when you have the event ID is logged along with the error messages. So when you type in the event ID, it's much easier to look for the relevant logs and error messages in the log storage. So when you're working with multiple resources, especially serverless applications, you need to find a way to have some sort of string and have some sort of way to label that string. So that string is the execution and that label is the event ID. So that event ID needs to stay the same for the entire execution cycle. So when there's an error in that specific execution, then you just type in that execution ID and all the relevant logs should be available to the engineers. So again, how does this work in a serverless setting? It's the same. And of course, you would have to set up metrics, alarms, and in some cases, distributed tracing. Sometimes when you're using serverless functions, the logging mechanisms there sometimes would be enough. From experience, a distributed tracing solution is recommended. So let's say that you have multiple functions in your serverless function. So one function calling the generative AI model, that's one function. Then another function calling the search engine, that's another function. Let's say that it takes your serverless function 80 seconds to process the request. With the distributed tracing solution, you would be able to figure out right away which function is causing the slowdown. So if the function associated to calling the generative AI solution takes 70 seconds, then you're able to troubleshoot right away. So that's on the code level. And sometimes when you're using some distributed tracing solutions on a serverless level would bind a monitoring script in the actual libraries of the function or the library. So for example, let's say you're using let's say DynamoDB, or you're using this service, then the distributed tracing solution would automatically bind stuff in the libraries that you're using. Then you would know if the HTTP request or the API calls are also causing the slowdown. So there. So that's the tweak that you need to know for the serverless monitoring solution. In addition to that, you have to monitor the models. So there's something called model monitoring. When working with these types of systems, it's important that you monitor, number one, the input and the output. So let's say that there's the prompt and then there's the output result. Then you would have to store that somewhere. It's going to be very helpful from a troubleshooting standpoint. If you're using the other models, then model drift is definitely relevant. Model monitoring for large language models, especially on the drift aspect, it's somewhat different, and I won't be discussing it here. So it's important for you to have more or less two versions of model monitoring. One for the non-generative AI models and one for the generative AI models. Security. A very exciting topic for serverless applications. So are you all excited for the next 5 minutes for this deep dive on security? Okay. So a lot of surprises here. So we'll make it quick. So what if you built a generative AI application which allows you to run an SQL query? So you spend 1 week coding it, and then suddenly, when you release it, one of the users suddenly run the following query. So the user type run an SQL query that deletes all records in the database. So you weren't ready for that. And it passed through all the security checks. And it passed through the serverless function, and the serverless function simply passed this to the generative AI solution, and the generative AI solution returned an SQL query that returned, I think, drop table, delete database, drop database, or anything of that sort. And then in your database, let's say it's Postgres, or let's say DynamoDB using Particle, it's able to run SQL. So right now, no SQL solutions could run SQL queries also, right? So regardless, it's possible for an attacker to input this type of prompt. So how do you protect yourself from it? So number one is you have to know what types of attacks are possible when you're dealing with generative AI solutions. Number one, there's something called model denial of service. Given that it's costly for us to run these types of solutions, and whenever there's heavier usage of the generative AI model, then of course there's the corresponding expenses. Then it's important for you to be aware of this type of attack. The second possible attack would be training data poisoning. So for example, you're using, let's say, the retrieval augmented generation powered environment, then it's possible for your solution to be attacked on the search engine aspect. So sometimes the search engine component is linked or mapped to a storage bucket. So if the storage bucket is hacked, then it's still possible to do training data poisoning even if the data is on the search engine end. Of course, it's no longer called training data poisoning. It's now called data poisoning. So again, there are different ways to perform this. One on the generative AI part, and the second one would be the search engine part. Prompt injection. So that's the example we shared earlier. So if you're able to run a malicious prompt, and if there are no guardrails on the application end and in the model end, then it's possible for an attacker or a malicious user to have your system do something which it shouldn't do. So if your generative AI solution is able to run functions, so let's say send an email. So what if there's a malicious prompt which allows a malicious user to send spam emails to other users? So prompt injection is very scary because not only is able to delete data, it's also able to make your generative AI system misbehave. So there are various different risks and vulnerabilities and attacks possible. And I won't go into detail into that topic. So make sure that when you're deploying and building these types of applications, it's important that you have good awareness of these types of attacks. So the previous years, these are just ideas. This year, this is a main topic. So this is the impact of DDoS attacks on these types of solutions. So if there's someone trying to bombard your service, then this will become denial of wallet. So what happens there is that you won't have money to pay for the bill because the resources, the runtime of the resources cost the cost to bloat. So that's the denial of wallet attack. So the best practice here is on the first release, you have to implement guardrails and ways to manage the overall cost of running the application, whether they are for malicious or non-malicious users. The second one here is that there are specific attacks which would attack the serverless resources. So let's say that you have a malicious payload. It is possible for the source code and credentials to be extracted from the vulnerable function. Wow. So you think it's just a concept? It's easy to perform. So let's say that you have a Lambda function and then you incorrectly implemented that Lambda function. Then someone who knows how to input this malicious payload would be able to steal the source code of the Lambda function. And there's also something called IAM privilege escalation. Because in reality, there are different types of entities, not just human entities, but also cloud resources. So if this cloud resources gets compromised, then if the security configuration is incorrect or misconfigured or provides too much power to anyone who has compromised the resource, then the attacker could simply execute a set of actions on other resources. So in this case, you may be able to create new resources, which would result in IAM privilege escalation. So for example, let's say that you are an AI environment, then someone from your team would be able to escalate privileges and have more power than that person is supposed to have. So the solution there is to have something called automated vulnerability management, which involves various tools in order to secure different configurations, especially on the cloud resources part. So I won't dive into the details there, but a quick teaser for everyone now that I'm ending my session is that most of the things that I've talked about, there's some major deep dive in my fourth book, Learning Serverless Security, which would be published April or May next year. So stay tuned to that book because there I'll be showing you how to hack and secure serverless resources, which of course would have the generative AI components as well. So that's pretty much it. And thank you so much for listening to my talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sir Joshua Arvin. So, to show our appreciation, so send your emojis, send your hearts, send your cheers to our speaker. All right, I see many hearts here. Thank you so much. All right, so we have a lot of questions for you here, sir. So let me what this is the first question. So this is from Sir Roy Tubo. So the question is, how much do you estimate to build a good AI powered app?
Thank you for that question. Medyo nagulat ako, daming questions na. How much do you estimate to build a good AI powered app? Sige, I'll provide templates na lang. No. So number one, my recommendation is try to do serverless first for the first 3 to 6 months. And then if you have more traffic after 6 months, then that's the time you replace certain serverless components with real-time inference endpoints. Okay. A good AI app would need to be better than the existing chatbots. So your definition of good probably means it has retrieval augmented generation in place. Okay. Should I say the numbers here? 500,000 for infrastructure cost. If you're trying to build a serious one. If you have non-serverless components, 500,000. No, infrastructure cost lang yan. Kasi the search engine part, if you're not customizing it in your own solution, if you're not using a customized solution, if it's not scaling to zero, some solutions have relatively expensive non-scale to zero search engine cost. So again, two components yun. Yung generative AI na large language model and the search engine for RAG. So if you're able to replace yung search engine part with something that scales to zero or something which is cheaper, then you could reduce the cost to maybe 10,000 pesos per month. When I say, so ano siya, it can be reduced to maybe 1,000 pesos per month or even cheaper or even lower if you're really good in solutions architecture. So dun pumapasok yung galing nung engineer or architect. And dapat part yun ng KPI. So if you're trying to hire someone, gawin yung part ng KPI yung cost management ng engineer or engineers that you're trying to hire. Kasi sayang yung pera if mali yung architecture. Yes. Hope I was able to help answer the question.
All right, thank you, Sir Joshua Arvin. So this is the next question. So this is from Ms. Diane May Ramos. The question is, in estimating the cost of the entire application, how can we ensure the scalability of the applications while managing expenses effectively?
Sige, okay lang bang magtanggalin yung question sa screen? Yan, para yan. So yan. So really good question. In addition to scalability, affected ng cost yung performance. Okay, so scalability and performance. Sa performance, meron dalawa. Yung performance ng system, so let's say from 30 seconds, naging 5 seconds response time. Yun yung performance. Meron ding performance nung generative AI model, nung large language model. So for example, let's say you have a large language model deployed sa isang 12x large na resource. Sobrang mahal nun, ganyan, di ba? 700K per month yata. Nung kinawantize na yung model, the performance level is expected to be lower na, yung performance. But you are able to deploy the same model na quantized sa isang 2x large na resource. So definitely, malayo yung 2x large saka 12x large. So there are cost savings there. However, it's different when you're working with a retrieval augmented generation powered system. Kasi even if your large language model is not that intelligent, but RAG is set up, hindi kailangan sobrang powerful nung brain. Kasi yung search engine yung nagbubuhat. At least from my own experience. So sometimes kasi, ito GPT-4 or ganitong ganda ng model. Pero kapag meron kang retrieval augmented generation in place, in most cases, kahit mahina yung model mo, nabubuhat siya nung search engine component eh. So, going back to the question, scalability. Yung scalability depends on the number of users. If you're using serverless, marirecommend ko yung solution na pinresent in the presentation where the brain, yung generative AI model, it's using a serverless service like Bedrock. Kasi you won't have to worry about scaling. Then, yung search engine na scalability, yun yung kailangan yung i-manage kasi baka doon magmahal, especially if hindi nag-scale to zero yung vector database. Some solutions would involve reusing an existing database kasi meron na pala silang ability to serve as a vector database. Other engineering teams, ang gagawin nila is, gagawa ko ng bagong architecture, tapos gagastos ako ng separate for the vector database. If your database, kunyari Postgres or Redis, if you're using that already or some other database, check first if it's able to also serve as a vector database kasi you're able to manage cost while ensuring that your system performs in an acceptable manner. And hope I was able to answer that question.
All right, thank you for that great answer, Sir Josh Arvin. So moving on to our next question. This is from Colleen Alejandrino. So the question is, with the current utilization of Gen AI in our applications, what do you think will be its further improvements or innovation?
Yes, thank you. Two parts. Number one, impact on end users, and number two, on the engineering end. So when you're trying to build something, of course, you have to check if people really want to use your application. So number one is managing hallucination rate. So when you're managing hallucination rate, you have to be aware of the different benchmarks. So very tricky yung benchmarks. No, parang di siya one size fits all. Kailangan talagang aralin yung sa benchmarks and model evaluation when it comes to large language models. So when you deploy a generative AI application, people would say, it's safe to be used in this industry. Paano kung maling information yung binigay? So yun yung risk sa hallucination. So one of the things that you can do is find a way to manage or mitigate or limit yung hallucination rate. Yung second part naman na I mentioned is yung sa engineering aspect. So may tinatawag na LLM ops, no? So ML ops is very different from LLM ops. There are some similarities, but you're dealing with more or less two different things na eh. So medyo iba siya kasi even yung mga model drift, it's super different. And even the automation pipelines, they're also different. And even the fine-tuning part, etc., preparing all the pipelines, automating the entire process, it's different also. So if your generative AI applications have become very complex, that's the time you have to review how automation works. So maraming klaseng mga architectures. Hindi lang siya gamit ng tools. So may tinatawag na FPI architecture. So may feature pipeline, basta training, saka inference. So different architectures can now be enforced and implemented on the engineering end and in the introduction of model registry, mga features, feature stores, and so on. So medyo nagpa-fall na siya on the machine learning engineering end.
All right, thank you, Sir Joshua Arvin. So moving on to the second to the last question we can accommodate, since I'm afraid we're almost done with our time. So this is from Isa Pearl Santos. So the question is, what are the key skill gaps that organizations need to address to build and maintain serverless architecture?
Yes, number one, cost management. Yes. So ito yung tricky sa cloud computing. In my own opinion, there are, especially in the Philippines, there are a lot of developers already able to integrate and code. Let's say if you're using a serverless resource or a cloud resource, 5 to 10 lines of code for POC, gagana na siya agad eh. No? So you're able to save a lot of time when working with managed services and serverless resources. No? And a lot of developers are trained with that ability, integration, coding. Pero it's hard to find professionals who have really good experience on the financial front. O pag tinanong na ano yung OPEX niyan, di ba? Di ba? Mga CTO na saka mga managers ni nakakaalam yan. And there's a big gap on that aspect. So, in my case, for example, tinetrain ko yung IT manager and tech manager reporting to me with financial knowledge. Kasi syempre yung mga finance teams, sa atin din naman tatanong eh. Ano kasi nagpapasahan ng bola eh. Oh, hindi, kayo na mag-compute yan, kayo yung finance eh. Sometimes they are dealing with a lot of things na yung tech and IT, that's just one component of the financial stuff that they're working on. So number one skill gap is really good understanding of what they call FinOps. No? So yun. So kailangan alam kung paano gumaganing costings kasi mahirap i-compute yung sa serverless na side. And generative AI, mahirap din siya i-compute. So number two would be good understanding on the data science and the machine learning end. A lot of people would say, oh, I'm an ML engineer. But in reality, they are AI engineers. In my opinion, magkaiba si AI engineer and si machine learning engineer. As far as I understand the definitions, AI engineer, they're able to utilize generative AI solutions or AI solutions with a few lines of code without having to understand the machine learning and machine learning engineering process. Once the application becomes a bit more complex, hindi na enough yung AI engineering. You have to understand machine learning and machine learning engineering, and it gets trickier once na nandyan na yung mga data science and mathematics na needed na knowledge. So for example, model evaluation. Hindi siya simple. Kasi ang gulo niya. So for example, let's say that you're going to deploy a new version of your generative AI application. How would you say that your current application performs better than the previous version? How would you say na it hallucinates less? Can your AI engineer explain that? So yun, I think those are the two skill gaps, but there's definitely more. So in-identify lang yung top 2 in my opinion. But really good question.
All right. Thank you, Sir Joshua Arvin. So this is the last question that we can accommodate for this session. This is from Maron Montano. So the question is, how are you able to prepare your own LLM without using said third-party solution? Example is ChatGPT.
Yes, thank you. Really good question. So there's something called Hugging Face. So search nyo, Hugging Face. So hugging, yung maka, face, mukha, Hugging Face. So if this is your first time working with these things, again, ang recommendation ko is utilize something like ChatGPT API sa start if you're not yet familiar with the machine learning engineering process. However, if na-try nyo na yun and relatively marunong na kayo with those relatively simple integrations, then you can start with working with your own self-hosted large language models. So how would that work? So maraming open source large language models and even small language models sa Hugging Face. Okay? So that's just one parang repository, no? So there, in that repository, you select which one is applicable to your use case. Tapos may mga libraries naman na available where you're able to use that large language model and deploy it and sometimes fine-tune, etc. No? And there are examples already in the internet. Please note that some tools like LangChain, etc., and I'm not sure if it's a coincidence, no? LangChain is generally, and other tools, mas madali silang gamitin kapag mga ChatGPT API, no? Pero pag mga large language models na open source, you need to have good customization capabilities to work with those large language models. But yes, really good question kasi at some point, you will have to host your own large language model kasi mas secure yun. Hindi lalabas yung data, hindi lalabas yung information, hindi siya lalabas papunta sa ibang third-party providers. So yun, super good questions.
All right, thank you, Sir Joshua. So I'm afraid our time is up. So I know you have many questions, so you may hold on to that question, and you may chat with our speaker, Sir Joshua Arvin, via AirMeet in the chat here. So that's all the time that we have for this session. So if you enjoyed this session, please give your rating and share your feedback about our speaker. You'll find the link in the chat box. So again, let's thank Sir Joshua Arvin by clicking on the heart and clapping emojis. Yes. Thank you so much for sending your emojis. So you may now exit this session and click on the next. Bye.